When the Pope grabbed the Cardinal's hand, the message was universally clear. The burden is now yours. In the high-stakes theater of the Vatican, emotion is usually suppressed. It is a world of marble, rigid protocol, and ancient silence. Tears are rare. A public breakdown of composure by the Supreme Pontiff is almost unheard of. Yet, in the late autumn of 2025, inside the frescoed expanse of the Clementine Hall, the script was thrown out. This wasn't a grand, televised liturgy with choir swells and incense. It was a raw, uncomfortably human moment between two of the most powerful men in Christendom, Pope Leo XIV and Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle. If you were standing in that room, watching the dust motes dance in the slanting November light, you wouldn't just see a boss saying goodbye to an employee. You would see a fissure in history. You would see the moment the center of gravity of the Catholic Church finally, irrevocably, shifted. To understand why a pope would weep openly before his court, and to understand the weight of the mission he was handing over, we have to leave the Vatican. We have to rewind the clock and fly half a world away, to a place where the air is thick with humidity and the noise of traffic never ends. The story of the man they call Cheeto doesn't begin under Michelangelo's dome. It begins in the chaotic, vibrant streets of Manila. Born Luis Antonio Joaquim Tagle in June 1957, his DNA carried the story of a changing world. He wasn't born into aristocracy. He was born into the grit of the Philippines. His grandfather, a Chinese migrant, didn't teach him theology. He taught him the grueling ethic of survival and hard work, an ancestral anchor that would later ground Tagle when he walked the polished floors of Rome. Growing up, Tagle wasn't aiming for the altar. He wanted to heal bodies, not souls. He was on track to become a doctor, but there is a specific kind of pull that happens in the devout households of Manila, a gravity that bent his trajectory toward the seminary. When he entered St. Joseph's Seminary, something became immediately apparent to his professors. He had a terrifyingly sharp intellect, the kind that usually leads to a life trapped in dusty libraries. But he also had something else, a pastoral heart. That's a church buzzword, so let's unpack it. It means he didn't care about theology as a math problem. He cared about how God makes sense to a grandmother dying in a slum, or a father who can't feed his kids. After his ordination in 1982, the church hierarchy, recognizing they had a prodigy on their hands, did what they always do. They sent him away to study. He landed at the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. Imagine the culture shock from the sensory overload of Manila to the stiff academic corridors of D.C. There, he dissected the Second Vatican Council, earning a doctorate summa cum laude. His obsession was episcopal collegiality, a fancy term for the radical idea that the Pope shouldn't run the show alone, but should govern alongside his brother bishops. Keep that in mind, because that specific idea is exactly what would bind him to the future Pope Leo XIV decades later. But here is where Tagle broke the mold. Usually, when a priest gets a high-level degree, they become an administrator. They disappear behind a desk. Tagle went back to the Philippines and got on a bicycle. Literally, as a parish priest and seminary rector, he was famous not for his lectures, but for his laugh, a loud, infectious sound that disarmed critics, and for his refusal to use a car. He rode a bike through his parish. He sat in the living rooms of the grieving for hours, not speaking, just being there. He was building a reputation as a listener in a church that was used to talking. By 2001, the Vatican couldn't ignore him anymore. Pope John Paul II tapped him as Bishop of Imus. For 10 years, he treated that diocese like a laboratory for community engagement. He was in the streets, in the dirt, visible and vulnerable. Then came the big leap. In 2011, Pope Benedict XVI handed him the keys to the Archdiocese of Manila. This is one of the toughest jobs in the Catholic world. It is a pressure cooker of poverty, politics, and massive, fervent faith. And Tagle thrived. He became a digital age phenomenon. Clips of his homilies started circulating on social media, not because they were intellectually dazzling, but because he would cry. He would openly weep when talking about the suffering of the poor. The world started calling him the Asian Francis, before Francis was even pope. They saw a man who didn't wear his rank like armor, but like a second skin that could bleed. When Benedict made him a cardinal in 2012, Tagle was the second youngest in the world. The signal was subtle, but distinct. The future is Asia. The future is this man. Fast forward to the corridors of power in 2019. Pope Francis calls Tagle to Rome to head the congregation for the evangelization of peoples. This isn't just a job. It's an empire. He was put in charge of the church's missionary work in vast swaths of Africa, Asia, and Latin America. He was holding the purse strings and the strategy for the places where the church is actually growing. It was here, in the grinding gears of the Roman Curia, that he forged a bond with Cardinal Robert Francis Prevost. Prevost, an American Augustinian, was the head of the dicastery for bishops. On paper, they were opposites. Prevost was the quiet, analytical American, a man of prayerful silence and strategic intellect. Tagle was the emotive, charismatic Filipino, but they clicked. They became the dual engines of Vatican reform. They shared a vision of a synodal church, one that walks together, one that listens before it commands. When the white smoke rose in May 2025, and Prevost emerged on the balcony as Pope Leo XIV, the inner circle knew exactly who his right hand would be. One of Leo XIV's first acts was to assign Tagle as the titular bishop of Albano. This wasn't random. Albano was the Pope's own former diocese. In the language of symbols that the Vatican speaks so fluently, this was a declaration of intimacy. The Pope was saying, "This man is my brother. He holds my former seat, he holds my trust." Which brings us back to that heavy afternoon in November 2025. The Clementine Hall, the moment of departure. Cardinal Tagle wasn't being fired, he was being deployed. Pope Leo XIV had created a new role specifically for him, personal legate to the churches of Asia. He was sending Tagle home, but with the full weight of the papacy behind him. As the Pope stood to speak, the script on the lectern was just a formality. He began to talk about the young priest from Imus, who brought the fragrance of the sheep into the sterile halls of the apostolic palace. Pope Leo XIV's voice, usually a calm baritone, began to waver. He looked out at the gathered cardinals and said, "In a world, and at times even in a church, tempted by power, by position, by pride, Cardinal Tagle has consistently shown us the way of the servant." The Pope went off script. He looked directly at Tagle, his eyes locking onto his friends. "He has never forgotten the faces of the poor. He carries them not as a burden, but in his heart." And then it happened. The composure cracked. Tears streamed openly down the Pope's face. It was shocking. Popes don't cry in public. Leo XIV was weeping for the loss of his daily companion in the trenches of reform. "And now," the Pope choked out of that same obedience, he leaves us to return to his people. As my personal legate, as my voice, as my heart in Asia." The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear the breathing of the Swiss guards. It was a raw, unedited display of brotherly love that shattered the caricature of the Vatican as a cold bureaucracy. The Pope concluded, "This is not truly a goodbye. In the heart of Christ, there are no goodbyes. This is a sending forth." When Cardinal Tagle stepped up, he didn't try to match the Pope's gravity with high rhetoric. He went low. He went humble. He described himself as a clay jar, a biblical reference to a vessel that is cheap, fragile, and common, yet holds a treasure. "Holiness," Tagle said, his voice soft but steady. "I am but a clay jar. Any good that has come from my service is not my own." He wasn't playing humble. He meant it. He defined his new mission not as a conquest, but as a connection. "My only desire is to be a bridge," he said, "connecting the heart of Peter with the vibrant heart of the church in Asia." The climax wasn't a handshake. It was an embrace. A long, desperate hug between the American Pope and the Filipino Cardinal that seemed to suspend time. That image, the white cassock and the red-trimmed black cassock intertwined, became the defining photo of the year. It symbolized a church that was finally bridging the gap between the old world and the new, between the head and the heart. Cardinal Tagle's legacy is already being written. He is the bridge builder. He is the proof that you can be a prince of the church without losing the smell of the streets. But this farewell signaled something deeper. It showed us that the future of the faith isn't in rigid structures, but in relationships. The tears of Pope Leo XIV proved that at the very top of this ancient institution, underneath the layers of silk and history, there is a beating, breaking human heart. The heartfelt farewell wasn't an end. It was the firing of a starting gun for a new era where the church looks less like a fortress and more like a family.